Welcome to another episode of History Now the Future, the show where we take a sharp look at some of the most pressing issues of today using history as our guide and the future as our destination. My name is Cory Bradford, and today I have the unfortunate task of doing something that I've done several times during my brief journalistic career that started back in 2016. I get to talk to you all about a recent string of gun violence in America. Now, usually I have to talk about a school shooting or a mass shooting that took place outside of a school. But this time, I get to talk about both. Last week, a 14-year-old high school student in small-town Georgia brought a semi-automatic assault rifle to his school and used it to kill 4 people, 2 teachers and 2 students, while injuring 9 others. The student has been arrested and charged as an adult, and the student's father has also been arrested and has received several charges relating to allowing his son to have such a weapon in the first place. As awful as this incident was, it just wouldn't be America if similar incidents didn't take place within the same week. 2 days later, a 16-year-old high school student in Maryland shot and killed a 15-year-old student in their high school bathroom. And just this past weekend, a man in Kentucky opened fire on a busy interstate, I-75 to be exact, shooting 5 people, but so far, no one has died in that incident. The man accused of that shooting, a 32-year-old named Joseph Couch, remains on the run as of the filming of this episode, and a massive manhunt is underway to apprehend him. So yeah, a pretty standard week in America for these types of events. Now, every time incidents like this occur, the American media repeats a familiar cycle. First, we give our thoughts and prayers to the victims and their families. Then, the two political sides rush into their seemingly never-ending and ultimately meaningless debate over gun violence in America. Republicans tell us that this isn't a gun problem, this is a heart problem. Yeah, I don't think cardiovascular issues are at fault here, but the Republicans also tell us that there's nothing that can be done to stop these events, and that ultimately, this is the price of freedom. High school students blowing each other away with assault rifles that have high-capacity magazines is the price that you as an American have to pay in order for you to be free to own these rifles yourself. And Republicans will remind you that these rifles ensure your freedom from government tyranny, even though you still pay more in taxes than the Founding Fathers could ever dream of, and owning all these weapons hasn't prevented that the least bit. It's almost as if conservatives realized as long as rural Americans can own their high-powered weapons, they won't even pay attention to how rigged the economy is against them. Meanwhile, the Democrats and the progressives go into their rants about how we should be trying to ban these assault rifles and how we should be working towards more comprehensive gun control legislation. They also continue to ignore the political realities that such legislation is damn near impossible as long as the gun lobbies continue to heavily fund the Republican Party. We have these arguments. We go back and forth, round and round in a circle, until within a week or two, the stories of violence leave the media cycle. We forget about it, let our guard down, and eventually, another school shooting or another mass shooting happens. And then we all engage in this pointless exercise all over again. Nothing ever changes, nothing ever improves. And we're left no better off than before the conversation began. Look, if America isn't going to confront its gun problem, then America needs to at least start to confront its mental health problem. Now, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say mental health issues cause a lot of these mass shootings, but that's actually a definable reality that neither side really wants to acknowledge, because the solutions involved would require us to take an in-depth look at humanity that few are ready to do. You see, Republicans, currently adding a new roof to their homes with all the gun lobby money, have to push the blame somewhere else. They love to claim that this gun violence is actually a mental health issue, without ever giving any real solutions regarding America's mental health problems. And when it comes to the left, they're so big on the idea of talking more about mental health and telling people to seek therapy. But when someone claims that a school shooter had mental health issues, they'll write it off and say, no. It's just a gun problem. Just keep the guns away from them and we'll all be fine. Now, I'm a responsible gun owner who actually believes in comprehensive gun control. I agree that unfettered access to certain guns is a major part of this problem. We did not see this high rate of mass shootings when we had an assault weapons ban between 1994 and 2004. Although, I will point out that the Columbine school shooting did occur during that time period. But when it comes to a lot of this violence in America, talking in circles about legislative solutions that will never come to fruition isn't helping. Many of the kids who become school shooters do these things because they were getting bullied, they feel inadequate, they are filled with rage and animosity and hatred towards the world, and some of them aren't even getting bullied at all. Some of them can't even explain why they feel the way they do. Now, I'm not saying we go down some mass pharmaceutical road here and put all these kids on medication, because that is probably already a huge part of why this problem exists. What I am saying is that these kids need therapy, and sometimes they just need someone to talk to. We've heard stories from potential school shooters who said they called off a plan to engage in violence just because someone asked them how they were doing on a random day. American politicians can't solve this problem. In fact, they're only making it worse. Gun sales after these incidents actually increase, partly because conservatives suggest that the Democrats are coming for your guns, even though deep down, all of these same politicians know that if Congress refused to act after Sandy Hook, they're probably never going to do anything about this issue. The only people that can come close to solving this problem is us. We as Americans have to start treating each other better. We have to start helping these lost young men instead of constantly throwing them under the bus, calling them incels. We have to start encouraging them to seek therapy. We have to do more research as a society on how their brains really work. And if we're not willing to do any of that, well, you might as well move to another one of the so-called developed nations in the world where this type of violence simply doesn't occur at this level. Have fun in Denmark or something. I don't know. We have a great show for you all. We're going to talk about the history of presidential debates. And wait a minute, the Russians were caught giving millions of dollars to far-right US media companies in order to sow more division in America? Gee, who would have thought something like that could ever happen? But first up, it's time for Trending Down. Welcome to Trending Down, the segment where we take a look at some of the more trivial topics floating around the internet in the past week. And this past weekend was the official start of the 2024 NFL season. And the fireworks have already started, and no, I'm not talking about the fireworks between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, although I'm sure that narrative will continue to be a big part of the NFL's overall script this year. I'm talking about the fireworks down in Miami. Miami Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill, one of the fastest and most accomplished players in the league right now, was arrested and detained just hours before the start of the Miami Dolphins season opener game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Videos taken by drivers passing by the incident show Tyreek Hill being handcuffed and eventually forced onto the ground by Miami-Dade police officers. Apparently, he was being arrested for speeding, which is kind of ironic. Arresting one of the fastest people in the NFL for speeding, I mean, that is his default setting. He's just doing what he gets paid to do, right? But no, speeding while driving is a serious issue. We all know there was an NFL player who killed someone while speeding a couple of years ago, so this is definitely something to take serious. However, Hill was released right after this altercation. In fact, he was playing in the Dolphins game just hours later. He even scored one of the key touchdowns for the Dolphins. After he scored that touchdown, he actually imitated being handcuffed, a post-touchdown celebration that won't be topped anytime soon. Now, one of the police officers involved in this incident has already been placed on administrative leave. And the body cam footage of the incident has just been released. I'm not going to show it here, but you can go and watch that and make your own decision about who was more in the wrong there. Personally, after watching the footage, I think both the police and Hill made some poor choices that day. But even before the body cam footage came out on Sunday when the incident first occurred, the internet was already filled with fake law enforcement experts claiming that this was all Tyreek Hill's fault. He probably was disobeying, not complying with commands, and he started the whole thing. Many of these folks are the same people who constantly complain that the government is taking their rights away. But they have no problem defending the police, which is an extension of the government, whenever officers are accused of depriving someone else of their rights. And usually, that someone else is of a certain background. It's like, come on. We all know why Hill was stopped in the first place. And we all know why these people are throwing his name under the bus. It's discrimination. Discrimination because Hill is, in fact, part cheetah. And also, I think those officers were just trying to cover the spread. Next up, another NFL-related story. It was announced this past weekend that rapper Kendrick Lamar is going to be the headliner of the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show. This is a big deal because as far as I can tell, Lamar will be the first solo rapper to headline the single biggest televised music event to occur within a calendar year. Now, Kendrick was a part of a group of rappers to perform at the Super Bowl back in 2022, along with Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and Eminem, but this time, Kendrick will be the main act. While there's a lot of enthusiasm for this news, not everyone is excited. Some rap fans believe that since the Super Bowl is going to be taking place in New Orleans, maybe Lil Wayne should have been chosen to do the halftime show. Although I personally don't think a national Super Bowl audience is ready to hear songs like Go DJ during the Super Bowl, as well as hear several references to promethazine during the halftime show. I'm just kidding there. I'm a fan of Wheezy. Others are also pointing out the fact that Kendrick Lamar, while being one of the most critically acclaimed rappers of the last decade, isn't necessarily on the same level as a Michael Jackson or a Prince or a Rihanna or Usher level act. You know, the types of acts that usually do the Super Bowl solo. And of course, there are those who claim that the main thing that propelled Kendrick to this gig was his recent fiery beef with rapper Drake. A beef that was ironically sparked by a Drake song in which Drake claimed he was as big as the Super Bowl, a line that continues to age like half and half. I meant milk. Now, some of my predictions for this halftime show, I think Kendrick might bring out Taylor Swift. They have a song together called Bad Blood. A lot of folks thought she would be the next headliner of this event, given her recent relationship with the NFL. I also think that Kendrick might perform his song Poetic Justice. That song contains a sample from Janet Jackson, and maybe he brings out Janet Jackson, which would make it her first appearance at the Super Bowl since her infamous 2004 show in which Justin Timberlake exposed her breast. Also, that song Poetic Justice originally featured a verse from none other than Drake. So he could invite Drake to perform this verse, and then immediately afterwards, Kendrick could pop out with a rendition of They Not Like Us with Drake still on the stage. Now that would be like Cory level public humiliation there. A type of savage that is just rarely seen on a national level. We'll have to see what ends up happening there. But last but not least, we're going to keep it in the hip hop realm here. Rap mogul, or should I say formal rap mogul, Damon Dash, had a bit of an incident in the last week. You see, rapper 50 Cent went on a podcast discussing the time when he received his first $1 million after signing with Dr. Dre and Eminem back in the day. And apparently Dame Dash was the only person who told him that $1 million really wasn't that much money. Now 50 Cent, coming from a poor part of South Jamaica, Queens, New York, took offense to this. Now Dame Dash is going through a lot of financial problems, and 50 Cent was kind of bragging about this, saying, look at Dame now. He has no money. Well, Dame Dash tried to respond to 50 Cent on Instagram Live, but during Dame's response, something unusual happened.
See if you're the real deal. Just see if I'm the real deal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if you didn't pay attention there, I think Dame Dash's teeth literally fell out of his mouth on Instagram Live. Okay, that's fucked up. Now, Dame claims that it wasn't his teeth that fell out, it was a grill, like one of those Paul Wall diamond grills, but I really don't see how that's any better. Dame Dash has had a history of having some pretty outlandish media appearances over the last few years, getting very angry at the fallout with his relationship with Jay-Z and different things like that. And you know, Dame, I'm just gonna tell you this in my best Jay-Z voice. You probably need to get off the internet and work on yourself a little bit because you're looking mad crazy right now. And hopefully you can find the proper orthodontist to make sure these types of things don't happen again on IG Live. Cheer! Tonight, we will see the first official presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Saying that the stakes are high would be an understatement. The last presidential debate saw one of the two candidates perform so badly, he had to drop out of the race. RIP to Joe. Well, I'm sorry, that was bad. He's still alive. These debates can certainly make or break a candidate and can push the election in one direction or the other. But the question is, how important have these presidential debates been throughout U.S. history? Have they always been so crucial to the outcome of our elections? The short answer is no, they haven't. In fact, presidential debates are sort of a modern practice when it comes to the campaign season, and they only really exist because of the advent of television. Before the 1940s, U.S. presidential candidates never really debated one another. The closest example we have from the 19th century was the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. Those debates that took place in 1858 were actually during their race for the U.S. Senate, and the two of them never debated one-on-one during their presidential campaigns in 1860. The first public debates between presidential hopefuls actually took place between primary candidates within the same party. Republicans held radio debates between their candidates Thomas E. Dewey and Harold Stanton in 1948, and the Democrats held similar intra-party debates in 1956 and 1960. In 1960, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon took part in the first real presidential debates to take place between two main candidates for president. These were also the first debates to be broadcasted on television, which gave Kennedy a significant advantage. Kennedy appeared more youthful and energetic on television, while Nixon, who was apparently getting over a brief sickness, appeared pale and unhealthy. He also chose a poor suit color and refused to wear any makeup, contributing even more to his drab look. Kennedy went on to win the election of 1960, and many people believe that his debate performance was a part of his victory. One could argue that this was the beginning of one's style and appearance playing a major role in a presidential candidate's ability to win elections. Presidential hopefuls from two different parties would not square off again in a debate until 1976, when Jimmy Carter debated incumbent President Gerald Ford. 76 also saw the first vice presidential debate between Republican VP nominee Bob Dole and Democrat candidate Walter Mondale. The second presidential debate of 1976, much like the first one in 1960, displayed the growing power that these debates could truly have. In that second debate, Gerald Ford made a huge blunder when he claimed that there is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe and there never will be under a Ford administration. This was obviously a huge lie. I mean, has he ever heard of the Eastern Bloc? And Ford never really recovered from that comment, helping his opponent Jimmy Carter win the election. The 1980s also saw the power and influence of hot debate moments grow larger. In 1984, after incumbent President Ronald Reagan had performed poorly in his first debate with Walter Mondale, Reagan fired back in the second debate with one of the most famous disses ever uttered during a political debate, when Reagan, answering a question about his old age, said,
"I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience."
Talk about a fucking mic drop. He may have ruined the middle class, but he was a damn good debater and public figure. Since the 1980s, debates have been a regular part of the presidential campaign process, and they usually draw large television audiences. The first 2016 debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton saw more than 84 million people tune in. That being said, this is usually the first time that many Americans get to see and hear from a presidential candidate directly, and it may be the candidate's only chance to make a good first impression on the American people. And unfortunately, policy and substance rarely plays a role in who wins these debates. It's more about who comes off sharper, who seems more competent, who produces more famous quotes, and of course, who looks better on screen. All of these factors will be important in Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's first debate, a debate that has probably already taken place by the time you watch this. Just make sure that when you're reviewing clips of this debate, pay close attention to the substance of each candidate's arguments and focus less on who has the best clapbacks and jokes. I mean, this is a contest for President of the United States, after all. It's not a Yo Mama competition. Can you believe that was actually a show on MTV for a while? Like, What was going on in the 2000s? This past week, the Department of Justice alleged that Russian operatives were bankrolling an American conservative media company, and that same media company has been accused of pushing pro-Russian propaganda as well as content that favored Donald Trump, someone the Russians seem to think would benefit them as president. We now know that the media company in question is the Tennessee-based platform Tenet Media, which is a major corporate force behind far-right commentators such as Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, and Tim Pool. The biggest social media stars involved in this scandal are claiming ignorance. Tim Pool, for example, has stated that he and others who were approached by Tenet Media were victims, claiming that the media company deceived them. Pool has also stated that his show and his social media videos were produced with no input from the troubled company in question. Now, the Justice Department's indictment doesn't necessarily contradict that claim, but it does state that Tenet Media's founders, Laura Chen and Liam Donovan, were aware that they were receiving money from the Russians. This is one of those stories where you're initially surprised to hear it, but it is ultimately 0% shocking. In fact, the only surprise here is that the Justice Department is actually taking any action at all against this. It's no secret that many American far-right pundits have been cozying up with the Kremlin for years now, as the two seem to share a ton of similar ideologies when it comes to concepts involving democracy, gender, and race. But shared ideology isn't the only factor here. If any foreign country is using American-based media to plant messages in the minds of unsuspecting Americans, then those messages would have to be beneficial for that foreign nation. The Kremlin isn't paying these conservatives millions of dollars just because they have the same opinions about trans people. The Kremlin knows that sowing this type of division in America can and will lead to the destruction of this country, or at the very least, it will lead to the end of America's global influence. That outcome would be welcomed by a country whose previous empire was partly destroyed by the United States, or at least we certainly keep taking credit for that collapse. The irony of people who worship Ronald Reagan for taking down the evil Soviet Union, but also can't see how they are being duped by its remnants, is not lost on me. YouTube has since taken down Tenet Media's pages, and the company's founder, Lauren Chen, a right-wing influencer in her own right, has been fired from far-right news company The Blaze. I guess pushing pro-Russian propaganda is only a bad thing if you actually get caught getting paid directly from the Russians. The crazy part about this story is it's not the only story about a foreign country gaining influence in America from this past week. Linda Sun, a former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who also worked for former Governor Andrew Cuomo, was arrested last week on charges claiming that she was working as an illegal agent of the Chinese government and that she used her political positions to further Beijing's agenda while enriching herself in the process. The federal government claims that Sun helped to block Taiwanese government officials from gaining access to Governor Hochul, and in exchange, the Chinese government aided in her husband's business dealings. Governor Hochul's team claims that Sun was fired promptly in March of last year after they discovered some of her misconduct. They also claim that they have assisted the federal government's investigations into Sun and these investigations into her husband, Chris Hugh, who has also been arrested and charged. So let me get this straight. The Russians have infiltrated American conservatives and the Republican Party, while China has gained political influence over American liberals and the Democratic Party. And China and Russia are somewhat friends, right? Internationally speaking. So it's not really a stretch to think that these two nations are working together behind America's back, sowing division among Americans in order to tear this nation apart at the seams, which would remove America as a threat to their national interests. Now, to be clear, I don't want this conversation to devolve into some type of racial discrimination against Russians or Chinese people. I know it may sound extremely cliche to say this, but I personally do have Russian and Chinese friends. And I've personally gotten very popular on TikTok, which is a company owned by a Chinese conglomerate. So someone could say, hey, Cory, you're popular on TikTok. How do we know you're not getting paid by the CCP to say certain things? Trust me, if that was happening, I wouldn't be doing this little rinky-dink podcast. But you have to understand just how Russia and China both stand to benefit if the United States is too busy fighting with itself and not paying attention to them. America has stood in Russia's way for decades. Its steadfast support of NATO blocks Russia's expansionist goals in Eastern Europe. Simultaneously, America is one of the biggest international backers of Taiwan, and it stands in China's way of asserting dominance over the tiny island nation. Russia and China have pretty much determined that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the two have concocted a sort of relationship that is now affecting our media, our political discourse, and our elections. We need to stop falling for it. Now, I'm not necessarily against Russia or China. I think that every country is operating in a lot of weird waters, including the United States, and you can never be fully against or for any single nation or its people. However, we do have proof that foreign entities are using propaganda to corrupt our political conversations and turning us against one another. So, the next time you're listening to some right-wing media pundit waxing poetic about how Putin's really not in the wrong when it comes to Ukraine, or you see some Democrat who's afraid to talk about the Uyghur situation in China, see, the fact that I even made reference to that means there's no way I'm getting paid by the CCP. Perhaps do a little bit of research about where these talking points are coming from, and more importantly, do some research about where the money is coming from. I want to thank you all for watching this week's episode of History Now the Future, and thank you for bearing with me as I know my voice is completely gone. I think I have bronchitis, and it probably was difficult to understand me at points in this episode, so hopefully we will have some subtitles or something that will make it easier. But thank you for watching. This week on our Thursday interview episode, I will be interviewing Jason Pargin, an author and reluctant TikTok star who is known for writing the book John Dies at the End, which was turned into a movie back in 2012. He's also written about 8 novels, and his newest novel, which is called I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom, is coming out on September 24th. It is a thrilling read about a cross-country trip that gets infected by social media all the way along. It is a great book, and it really reflects a lot about contemporary issues and just all the craziness that social media has unleashed onto this world. I highly recommend that book, and I also highly recommend you tune in to our conversation with Jason, which will be taking place this Thursday. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube page so you never miss an episode. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys next week.